Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morin. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound, our final episode of the season. Shortly, we are going to be joined by Sportsnet and the host of the 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliotte Friedman. But long year for us, going back to the fall, and if you had known we have done this much volume, covering 4 different franchises, wraparound, short shifts, New York-centric, and Stanley Cup date, I don't know if we could have tolerated each other all season.
Don't forget the specials that we did, too. We did a couple of specials, including the Islanders and their 45th anniversary of the 1980 Stanley Cup. That was a lot of fun to do that one. I got to tell you, though, we joke around about it not being fun with each other, but I've had a blast this season. I really am very, very happy with the way this season went for us, and for that matter, even for the NHL.
There's no question. And it's not only what we've done, and I think we are both very pleased with the body of work, but where we're headed in next season and hopefully well beyond that with other things that we've planned. And we're looking to bring more current players onto our show, coaches perhaps. And so this has been a great venture for a year and a half and look forward to it continuing.
For sure.
But first, let's do 3 things you need to pay attention to, brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc. And we start off with the breaking headline that with Mitch Marner gone to the Vegas Golden Knights, the big fish left was Winnipeg Jets winger Nikolaj Ehlers, and he has now found a new home.
He's found a home where he looks a lot like the players they already have, and that's with the Carolina Hurricanes. And it'll be interesting. This is going to be a very high-skilled team again. But as I just said, a lot of players that look the same, albeit high level.
6 years, $51 million, $8.5 million AAV. Now, let's break this down a little bit more, because I believe that Carolina, and I think you believe this too, needed to land somebody big long-term, because that's a franchise that, as we've mentioned numerous times, they couldn't keep Gensel, they couldn't keep Rantanen, they tried to get Marner. Marner didn't want to go there. Ehlers decides to go there now for a half dozen years. But the truth is like you said, a lot of similar players, and for the solid player that Ehlers is, he's never scored 30 goals in a season.
Right. And so where does that put them with Seth Jarvis, with Sebastian Aho, 2 of their best players, penalty killers? They play all different roles, all situations for the Carolina Hurricanes. There's no doubt that Nikolaj Ehlers is an upgrade on any team. He's a top 3 to top 6 at the worst forward. And he will help the Carolina Hurricanes undoubtedly. But they've spent a lot of money in the last 2 days when you think of K'Andre Miller coming from the Rangers and now the Winnipeg Jets, Nikolaj Ehlers. A lot of money.
I think something to look at also, and you mentioned Jarvis and Aho, and let's say it's Svechnikov to that mix as well, and whether or not Ehlers' presence actually helps elevate their game.
Well, and I think it will. I think that their power play will be better for it. They'll be an all-around better team with Ehlers. And that's why we had Ehlers as one of the top 3, at least, because we didn't mention today Brock Besser signed back with Vancouver, and he was in that group of big-time free agents, Marner headlining that. But Ehlers will help Carolina. But is this the exact type of player that they need? We'll have to wait and see.
Well, like we said, I think Carolina had to have that big fish, though. And
yeah, I think so. And for Nikolaj Ehlers, he goes from maybe the coldest place on, in the league in Winnipeg. On some days, it certainly is, to one of the best weather spots in the entire league in Raleigh, North Carolina, where it rarely snows. And he'll enjoy the weather, that's for sure. And it's a great town and a great place to live.
We'll be picking up about 100 degrees during the middle of January.
Yeah. Portage in Maine is not in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Item number 2. The NHL players are officially headed to the Milan Olympics. This came over on Wednesday. It's really not a secret, but for the first time since 2014 in the Sochi Games, NHL players will now be present. And you also have to think that in 2030, they'll be going to the games in the French Alps. Bill Daly has said as much. It's not a done deal yet, but it's looking good because behind that, in 2034, are the games in Salt Lake City. And that Utah Capitol hosted the games in 2002. So I think from what we can see, NHL players for the foreseeable future will be in the Olympic Games.
Yeah, they'll be participating, and it's been a long time since we've seen them. But I got to tell you, I look forward to it. I didn't in the past. I do this time because I was so taken by the Four Nations face-off this past hockey season and the intensity and the great hockey that we saw. So I think you'll see that again in the Olympics, and it's going to be exciting.
And remember, it's in Milan, and that city has some significance for us because it's going to bookend our show later on, so stay tuned for that. Item number 3. Labor peace until the year 2030, right before the NHL draft last week. The NHLPA have agreed to extend the CBA till mid-September of 2030. But I'm also wondering whether something was missing in terms of how tampering is going to be dealt with, and also the LTIR loopholes. And that's something that we look forward to speaking more with Elliotte Friedman on.
That's for sure. And those are two hot topics, at least with me. Tampering and the obvious tampering that's been going on the last few years. And then this LTIR loophole that we first saw with Mark Stone a couple of years ago, and then this past year saw with Matthew Tkachuk. And by a loophole, what we mean by that, in case you're not familiar with it, is somebody puts a player on LTIR until the playoffs when they can bring them back, and there is no salary cap in the playoffs. So they fill in with a real good player, i.e. Seth Jones. And then when the playoffs start, in comes Tkachuk again to play for the Florida Panthers. So there's got to be some remedy for this, and we'll see if Elliott's heard anything.
Also, remember Nikita Kucherov.
Absolutely.
Did that during one of the COVID years. So it's the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what? I think we're feeling so good today about the final show of the year. How about a fourth thing to pay attention to? And that is NHL Ironman Brent Burns headed to the Colorado Avalanche. 1 year, $1 million, has bonuses that could earn him up to $3 million more. He's entering his 22nd NHL season, has played 925 consecutive games. He hasn't missed a game since the 2013-2014 season. It's his fourth team following the Wild, Sharks, and the last 3 with Carolina.
And it's a perfect place for him because that's where people say Sasquatch lives. And so you've got Brent Burns going into the Colorado mountains and into Denver. And when he skates out onto the ice a lot of fans will think, my goodness, they've signed Sasquatch.
And with that, that wraps up 3 things that you need to pay attention to, actually, for this time. Brought to you by UBS Financial Services, Inc.
And now it's time to bring in the voice, not the picture, but the voice of an old friend from Ontario, Toronto. We worked together on TV many moons ago. Elliotte Friedman is joining us, and that's a big deal for us, Elliotte. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Neil and Vic. No problem.
Elliotte, I want to start off by giving you a little pump on the podcast that you do. And we've been doing this now since January of 24. We've had a lot of shows go out, but you started your podcast now called 32 Thoughts, originally started as 31 Thoughts. You started it back in 2018. Can you give me give us or give the listeners what your initial vision was for that podcast?
You know what? It's kind of funny as you were going through your question, Neil. I started to think about that. I think like a lot of podcasts, we had no idea that this was going to be a thing. Like, it was Scott Moore who came to me and said, we want to try this. We want you to do it. We want to expand this 31 Thoughts brand. And we were like, we'll do one a week, and hopefully a few people will listen to it. And, he said, do you want to do it by yourself or do you want a co-host? And I thought about it, and I was like, no, I want a co-host. You want someone to riff off of, and Jeff Merrick was the guy they picked, and he was a great co-host, great choice. But eventually, the numbers, we were lucky. I had a good audience. The numbers got good. We got to 2 every week now, Monday and Friday, and some bonus ones here and there. And in the playoffs, we went to 3 times a week. And, Neil, like, for hockey fans out there, they're rabid. They can't get enough content. And it's great because that means we can all have jobs. But if you would have told me at the beginning that hockey podcasting was as big as it turned out to be, I never would have believed it. Like, we were, hoping that we would have enough consistent listeners that we could do one a week for a year. And, I'll tell you, I was at the Stanley Cup final, and we were doing one after every game. And, people got used to like 3 a week in the playoffs. They were like, where are they? They got to come faster. And that's a good thing for all of us. But geez, I had never idea that these things would be this big. Never.
Yeah. And it's really good. And everybody that's listening to this, if you haven't caught 32 Thoughts, you got to do it. Obviously, the 32 is the 32 teams, and we started off as 31 teams only a couple of years ago. So that's why you're on the 31. But you get a lot of information, insights, and scoops from Elliotte, right, Vic?
That's for sure. And at the top of the show, we noted that Nikolaj Ehlers now in Carolina. Brent Burns has gone from Carolina to Colorado. So any update on defenseman Dmitry Orlov?
No, there's a lot of defensemen out there, Vic, who kind of got squeezed. Orlov is one of them. Guys like Matt Grzelcyk, Jan Ruda, Travis Hamonic. I think there were a bunch of guys who got paid, obviously, and then I think teams kind of put the squeeze on some of these other players. So, Orlov, I think Carolina had offered him around $4 million. He said no to that, and I could see why he would. He would think he's in this market, he's worth more than that. But at this point in time, I haven't heard anything solid for him.
There's a little bit of groundswell going up in Buffalo regarding Bowen Byram and a possible offer sheet. And I think that offer sheets was something that we perhaps maybe were expecting to hear a little bit more about, coming off the signing in St. Louis with Holloway and Broberg a year ago.
Yep.
Anything on the Byram situation?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Vic, is that I think there were 2 offer sheet threats. I think they both came from Carolina. I think Edmonton was legitimately worried about an Evan Bouchard offer sheet from Carolina, and that's why his deal got done as quick as it did. And I think the Rangers knew one was potentially coming for K'Andre Miller, and that's why the 2 teams worked out a trade, because Carolina was prepared to do it, and the Rangers knew that. And if you look at the trade that the Rangers made for Miller, it's a first, a second, and Scott Morrow. Morrow obviously wouldn't have been involved in an offer sheet, but the first and the second is pretty close to what Carolina would have had to pay. So I do think even if the offer sheet wasn't signed, there was an offer sheet threat in both of those cases, and both Oakland, and both Edmonton and the Rangers knew it. As for Byram, I do think the agent, who's Darren Ferris there, is working hard to try to get Byram to another team. I do think that the offer sheet idea has been kind of thrown around. I think he would prefer a trade. Buffalo was actively trying to trade Byram leading up to the draft. I just heard that Buffalo felt the market was soft. So a couple things are going to happen here. Either we do get an offer sheet, or Byram goes to arbitration, and the filing deadline is on Saturday, I think, July 5th.
Yep.
Or he's going to get dealt. But I do think that the agent has been trying to get some traction there, and I just don't think Buffalo has liked what the trade market has shown for him.
Elliotte, I'm going to skip over what I was going to ask you and talk about 4 defensemen that I think are horribly overpaid now. You mentioned one, K'Andre Miller, another guy that I've seen play at least 200 times is Dobson, Evan Bouchard in Edmonton, and then Provorov in Columbus. It just seems, well, and then there's others at a lower level, but these are the high number guys. I don't want to go to the LA Kings guys that they signed, but they're lower. But my goodness, Elliotte, these guys, like I've seen K'Andre Miller play since he got there. If he's a $7 million defenseman, I'm a $10 million podcaster.
Well, I hope someone decides that you are, Neil. I like to see people get paid. First of all, Neil, I'll say this, especially as a former manager, this, you're worth what somebody's willing to pay you. And, I always look at that. I never begrudge, anyone for any of these deals. Is someone I remember there was an NBA player, John Koncak, who got a ridiculous offer sheet one year, totally overpaid. And as a matter of fact, his nickname became John Contract. And I remember he got interviewed about it. And finally he just said, look, I know it's more than I'm worth, but what am I supposed to do? Say no? And so I always look at it that way. If someone's going to throw you the money, you're going to take it. Now, this year is the first time in a long time the cap has gone up. And you knew that this free agent group, they were going to benefit from it. And the other thing, too, is, Neil, here's the thing that I really stood out. So the Board of Governors met last week in Los Angeles before the draft. And I was talking to one of the governors, and his team is looking for players. They look like a bunch of other teams. They're looking for a center. And he said to me, you know what the problem is this year? And I said, what's that? He goes, there's not enough players available. We have a year, there's only one team in the league, and that's Pittsburgh, that is actively looking to get worse. You have a bunch of teams that want to get better, a bunch of teams that say, oh, this is not our year. And so there's a group of players available that everybody can try to get. There's only one team right now really trying to get worse, and they've still got a couple of players that are good to be available, Raquel and Rust. But like, other than that, there's not enough supply for the demand. So some guys were going to get paid. And, you know, and I mean, we'll see even more next year. We'll see even more next year. Like, you take a look, like McDavid's due for an extension. Panarin's due for an extension. Kaprizov's due for an extension. Eichel is due for an extension. Cale Makar is a year away from being eligible for an extension. Wait till we see what those numbers are. You know, Neil, I've always felt in this league, offense gets you paid. Like, Evan Bouchard was eligible for arbitration. If he goes to ARB, his number is going to be close to $10 million. Noah Dobson is a year away from unrestricted free agency. You know, Miller, he's not the biggest point producer, but the bottom line is, I just thought, like, points gets you paid, so that's Bouchard and Dobson, and the cap went up. These guys benefited from being free at the right time, and there just wasn't a lot of players available. That's what happened.
And that's a great explanation, Elliotte. I really mean that, because for all of those people out there that are saying, where the heck are we going with these numbers? That's really good. And I listen, I've been doing this a long time, and I overpaid people myself, and didn't want to, didn't mean to, but it turned out that way. And you can't blame the player because he got overpaid. And a lot of fans will do that. They'll boo guys off the ice because they make too much money for their production, when it's really not their fault.
Yep.
It's the manager and the owner's fault for paying it. Let's go to something else that I really is.
You know what, Neil,
Yeah.
Can I just mention something about that? Because this is so true. Do you remember when Brian Campbell left Chicago and got a huge contract with Florida?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Dale Talon told me something I've never forgotten. I said, like, you know, how do you think that Campbell can handle that? Because some guys don't care about the criticism they get for that. Some guys care. And he said that I told Brian Campbell, you do not have to justify your salary. The way you've played in the past got you this salary. If you change, you're going to be in trouble. If you don't change, you're going to be fine. And Campbell still had real trouble with it. Like, it was something that got to him. But I always remember that explanation from Dale Talon, is that guys have to understand that you can't justify your salary in one game. But if you play the way you always play, you will eventually justify it. And I look at Bobrovsky, remember when he signed that deal? All of us were saying, oh my God, that's a horrible contract. And now he's consistent. He stayed true to himself. And now nobody's complaining that contract was a bad contract.
When he first got there, they were mortified the first couple of years. I remember my friends that are season ticket holders down there hating him, but now they love him, of course, like you just said.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to ask you and talk to you about another thing that just drives me nuts. Maybe you can explain this to me too. And that is tampering. And, you know, Marner, come on, there had to be tampering by Vegas on Marner. And I got to say that unless Chris Drury is an absolute magician and he's like the Evelyn Wood of negotiating, how did he get a deal done in an hour and 15 minutes with Gavrikov? So what is going on? Are they just turning a blind eye to all this stuff?
So this is another great question. Now, the story hasn't fully come out. I think we're going to talk about it on the pod tomorrow. But one of the reasons I think the Rangers were able to do Gavrikov so quickly is I think they were working on a sign and trade with the Kings. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but, you know, there's something for you. I do think a sign and trade nearly happened so that Gavrikov could get that 8th year. So I think, you know, since the Kings were involved, I think everybody knew what was going on there. So that's that. But tampering. So last year, the league got annoyed, and I heard later they told me they got annoyed. Like, basically the way it works, Neil and Vic, is that every year on July 1st at 12:01 p.m., all the reporters who do this, myself and the other guys, we start reporting the deals, right? And last year, the league finally said, enough is enough. Like, enough of this stuff. Like 1201 and Elliott's tweeting them out, or some of the other guys are tweeting them out. And they said, we hate this. So at the GM meeting in November, the one around the Hockey Hall of Fame, they told the GMs they were gonna crack down on this year. Like, they didn't want any more tampering. And they sent out a memo that said, here are the fines, up to $5 million, forfeiture of draft picks, suspension, expulsion. Like, they said stiff penalties. And so this year, I talked about the tampering with Marner on one of my recent podcasts, or that I want to be very clear. I have no evidence of this, but I know the Leafs felt there was some. And after I talked about that, I had some other teams tell me that there are other teams that think that there were some of their players were tampered with. And I had some GMs say to me that they think the league just wants to make an example out of someone. And so, like, one agent told me that he reached out to a GM about one of his players, and the players and the GM said to him, I'd love to talk to you about this guy, but I'm going by the book. You reach out to me at 12:01 on Tuesday, and we'll talk then. And the agent goes, really? And he goes, I think they're going to kill somebody. And and this year, Neil, if you'll notice, at 12:01, there wasn't the flood. It came later. Like, the first deal I had was Christian Dvorak to the Flyers, and it was 1 year at 5.4. Like, that's an easy one to do. So I think that these teams were really worried about it. The other thing I was reminded about was when the Leafs signed John Tavares, they got investigated by the NHL. And Lou Lamoriello took pains to call the Maple Leafs and say, I did not ask for this. And the league just did it themselves. It wasn't a big investigation. They cleared the Leafs, but they wanted to make sure that this was done properly. And so I think it's all on the league. Like, do they want to do something about this? Like, they've made some noise about it, Neil, and we're going to find out if they really want to do it.
Do you see them maybe changing the window like they used to have for giving the teams a little, like a 10-day advance?
Well, it used to be 7. I wonder if they would go to 3.
Yeah. Well, it's so obvious to me, having done all of this stuff and did it back in the day. You had to find ways to do it. You had to. But I think today it's so obvious. Whereas at least we tried to hide it in our day. I want to ask you about another thing that's driving.
That's pretty funny, actually.
Another thing that's driving everybody nuts, another loophole, is long-term injured reserve. And are they going to address this of the Mark Stone, Matt Tkachuk?
They did.
Okay. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically they changed it in the CBA, and they had 2 very interesting proposals. Well, not proposals. They have 2 new rules that have done it, Neil. Number 1 is that in the playoffs, your roster can be whatever. Like, if the salary cap next year is 95, if your roster's 100 overall, whatever. But your in-game roster has to be under the cap. Like, when you submit your lineup and your 20 guys, it has to be cap compliant. So that's one thing they've changed. Now, they changed something else, which is actually a bigger deal. So they've basically said that when you have a guy going on LTIR, the only credit you get now is the previous year's average annual salary. So let's just use Matthew Tkachuk from last year as an example. So Tkachuk's salary was $9.5 million. And as a result, when he was out, they could use that space, the way they worked it, to replace him with players. That's how they got guys like Marchand and Seth Jones, who were huge factors. Well, what happened was they've changed it so that now the average annual salary last year was approximately $4 million. So next year, any player that goes on LTIR, the maximum credit you get is $4 million. So if the player's like a player making $2 million, you get the $2 million. If a player's making $3.5 million, you can get the $3.5 million. So Matthew Tkachuk, a $9.5 million player, becomes now $4 million. That's the way it's going to work. The average annual salary for the year before. So anyone who has a big salary who goes now onto long-term injury, you won't be able to use that full credit. You'll only be able to use that maximum number, which for next year is going to be around $4 million. The only way that changes, Neil, is if you declare the player out for the year, including playoffs. If you want to say this guy's not going to be able to be back all year, including playoffs, then you can use that full credit. That's the big change they made, and that's significant. That's going to change the way this happens.
While we're at it, we're going to go back to something that we had talked about just a short while ago, and breaking news, Dmitry Orlov has a new team.
Yes, Dmitry Orlov is going to the San Jose Sharks, 2 times 6.5. San Jose, they need to hit the floor. They need some defensemen. Should have probably seen this coming, but I guess I'm not as smart as I think I am.
Well, somebody that I think everybody thinks is pretty smart right now is Bill Zito, because somehow he managed to retain Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, Aaron Ekblad, and Ellie, you've been around this for a long time, and you've seen the 3 cup winners in Chicago last decade. You saw the back-to-back in Pittsburgh. You saw the back-to-back in Tampa. But there is something that has been talked about the camaraderie of this Florida Panthers team. And does this look markedly different than the 3 clubs that I just mentioned? Players really wanting to commit to this franchise.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. Obviously, like Neil, you were a manager at a time in this league at a time when Florida was an absolute dead zone, right? Like nobody wanted to go there. And look at them now. And I think ownership deserves a lot of credit for what they've done there, and Zito and his staff too, and the players. Everybody made it work here. Do taxes matter? Absolutely. But nobody was going to Florida, even when the taxes were good, when it wasn't perceived the way it is now. And people would always say, Vic, to me, like Brian Burke would always say to me, the biggest sleeping giant in the league is the Panthers. Like, why can't they be just as good as Tampa? Same state, same climate, similar situations. But Tampa for a long time was the model franchise, and Florida wasn't. And finally, they've gotten off the mat. We talked a lot about the cap going up and free agency. I'll tell you this, if what this year proved to me was with the cap going up, it's going to benefit teams that players are happy with. Because look at all the guys in Florida who stayed. Brock Besser out of nowhere stayed in Vancouver. I think the biggest advantage about, and especially now that, they've done a little bit to contracts in the CBA, if you're happy where you are, boy, that's a huge advantage for the team that has your rights.
I think the other guy that deserves a lot of credit for players wanting to play there and returning there is Paul Maurice, because he has obviously 100%. Created an environment. And for the criticism he was put on him when he first got that job out of Winnipeg, it's sort of comical now because of the job that he's done. Let me go to one other loophole, Elliotte, and you could explain this to the listeners and actually to me, which is that now what teams do to get you to the number that you want. Let's say you want a number of $4 million a year. That's your number. That's what your agent says is your number. And they say, well, we can't fit $4 million a year into our cap. So what we will do is, instead of giving you $4 million times 2, we'll give you $2 million times 4. And we don't expect you to play at 41 and 42 years old. We'll just put you on long-term injured at that point. We'll agree with you that you can't play anymore, and you'll go on, i.e. Brad Marchand's contract. What about this?
Well, first of all, Neil, I got to say, like, you and I I'm glad you don't play fantasy football with me, because I try to create these rules all the time, and I can tell we'd hate each other because you like the rules and I don't. So, like, it's a good thing that we're not in fantasy football against each other. So like Marchand you're talking about, people looked at this with Chris Tanev's deal in Toronto last year. You know, Jake Allen signed for 5 times 1.8. People were looking at that one too. But, like, to me, like, if it's not against the rules, I don't have a problem with it. I will say this, that Marchand deal, that is the most unique deal in NHL history. I don't think there's ever been a contract, a 6-year deal at 37. Like, guys who get to 40, they sign 1-year deals here and there, a 6-year deal to get to 43. I've never seen that before. I understand why some people hate it, but if I was a team that could do it, I would do it 100%.
But Elliotte, I'm not saying that I hate it, and you know damn well when I was manager of the Rangers, I would have done whatever I could do with the rules that I had. Okay, but I'm just saying to you that when something's this obvious about what a team is doing, will there be some components of the league, the managers, owners, governors, league officials, that will be screaming, this isn't fair. You shouldn't be able to have Brad Marchand on the Panthers at a realistic number. But the way you do it is just by a wink and a handshake.
You know what? I have no doubt some people hate it, Neil, but you know, this new CBA just got signed for 4 more years, so it's 5 years overall. If anything's going to happen, it's not going to be until then. But if someone wants to take aim at it, we're going to see it in half a decade.
Okay, let's move on to the Kings and one of my close friends, Kenny Holland. Luke and Kenny, both good friends of mine, they let Gavrikov leave. You mentioned earlier that there was some talk of a sign and trade between the Rangers and the Kings. My question to you, which I don't have the guts to ask Kenny, is why wouldn't you just take Dumoulin and Cece's money and give it to Gavrikov instead of signing a 31 and 33-year-old that are definitely in the third pairing on your team when Gavrikov's in a top 2 defenseman? Why didn't they just overpay him?
Well, you know what? I got to ask. You should ask Kenny because it's a really good question. I don't know. Like, I don't know if Gavrikov wanted to leave or what the situation there is, but I know I heard, all year long, I heard Gavrikov was going to stay. And I don't know if he got lowballed early or what happened exactly, but he switched agents in the middle. And it's an agent who does a lot of deals with the Kings. I just heard that Gavrikov had a number with the Kings and they just didn't get to it. I think it's possible. I think it's possible, Neil, that the Kings felt very strongly that they needed 2D and they needed the flexibility to do that. Like, I heard they were looking for 2 defensemen and they went out and they got them. I just wonder if they felt, look, like the most we can give one guy is this, because we need a second good guy is this at this number to get it. Like, if you give Gavrikov 8.5 or 8, which he got close to, you don't have enough money to do the second phase of what you want to do here, right? So I guess that without asking Ken Holland, I would suspect that's the reason. But I heard Gavrikov felt there was a number the Kings had to get to, and I guess they just never got there.
And that's a good explanation that people wouldn't have thought of that are listening to this and so on. Kenny's taking a lot of criticism, as you know, for the age of the players that he signed on free agent day and the quality of the players. It was obvious that he would bring Corey Perry there. I mean, he did a smart move bringing him to Edmonton, and we saw what that did for the Oilers. I mean, he went to the finals twice with them. Brought in Joel Armia, goaltender Forsberg, and the Kuzmenko deal is good because that's the only place so far that Kuzmenko seemed to have any chemistry. What are your thoughts on the Kings overall? Just real quick.
Well, I'll say this about Dumoulin too. Like, I heard there was a ton of interest in Dumoulin. It's like, one of the deals that a lot of people were really criticizing was Jeannot with Boston. And it's supply and demand. Like, if you just, I heard had 10 teams after him. And I heard there were a lot of teams after Dumoulin. So that drives the price up. If you look at what Ken did with Edmonton, it's very similar. He brings in veterans. People don't always like those veterans, but basically he brings them in as sort of support players to the guys who really need to drive the bus. So I think Gavrikov is a huge loss for them, Neil. I'm with you. I really like that player. I think he's a really good, solid player, and I think the Kings are really going to miss him. And to me, the jury is out. Can those two guys adequately replace what they just lost? To me, the biggest thing, the Kings had Edmonton beat last year, and they let them off the mat. Does Byfield take the next step? Do those guys recognize how close they were and that they should have done it? I think it's on their core players to make a big difference, but I agree with you. I think that's a big loss for the Kings.
Two other quick things from me, and then I'm going to let Vic go. But you can be sure that Ken Holland talked to his good friend Jim Nill about Ceci.
He had him also. He's had him in Edmonton, right? He knows him.
Yeah, but it's a bit of time later. My suspicion is he would have called Jim Nill and say, Jimmy, do you think he's still got it? But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention to you that you'd be great at is, okay, so Jeannot signs in Boston, way overpaid. Doesn't that have an impact on comparables? Because
because it's a UFA deal. Like in arbitration and stuff, you can't. Well, I should say this. In arbitration, no, because it's a UFA deal. You can't use UFA deals in arbitration. So now, will other agents say, okay, well, my Jeannot-like comparable, is that my similar players comparable to that? Yes. One of the best books I ever read, Neil, was called The Bald Truth. It's by David Falk, who was Michael Jordan's agent, among other players. And he always talked about how if a team ever came at him and said, well, this comparable did this, he would say, well, that's their situation. It's not this situation. And I've always thought like that. Like I said, if you're a team, you've got to say, well, that's their situation. That's not our situation. Doesn't always work, but that's the attitude you have to have.
Well, I actually had one of my players, and you'll know who it is, but I'm not going to say, came in and tried to use Patrick Ewing as their comparable.
Oh, I remember this. Well, he wrote about it in his book.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Somebody will have to figure out whose book it is.
I won't do that to you on your own podcast.
Yeah, please.
Elliotte, a couple for me before we wrap up here. And, of course, last weekend, NHL Draft held at the Peacock Theater in Los Angeles. It was a decentralized event, and coming off of the big success at the Sphere in Vegas in 2024, the general managers, I guess, voted 26-6 to go decentralized, and let's just say didn't go quite as planned in terms of a rousing success.
No, it didn't. Vic, like the pylon's already there. I don't need to contribute to it. I actually thought there were like that Matthew Schaefer kid. I mean, what a kid that is! Like, whoa, did the Islanders hit a home run with that kid? And there were some other really good moments. I really liked them, but it wasn't a success. And I think they'll go back. I think they'll go back to it. I really look. I think everybody realized when they convened at the Sphere that it's not like the Sphere every year, but it was missing something. I think they're going to try to find ways to maybe give the teams a bit more privacy. I heard that's one of the things they're going to try to address. But I think we're going back to. I think we're going back to where we used to be.
Well, I mean, and Neil knows first and foremost that there is a thing about that intimacy and those tables and being able to look people in the eye face to face, and probably also that there weren't many deals that came out of this involving players. And there's certainly that was a factor too.
Yes, I mean, it was like, there's no question about it. And like, you know what? I think too, like, I know some GMs don't like it, but there is a showmanship to this. There is a show business aspect to this. It's unique to the NHL. It's the only league that does it. And it's not like these guys were saving any cost bringing all their scouts and staff to their NHL cities. So, like this was ours, for lack of a better term. And I think it's a real big loss that we didn't have it.
You know, just a quick thing to prove my age, Elliotte. I was there when Dennis Potvin got picked first overall.
Oh my! Well, I got to tell you, you look good, Neil. That's the most important thing.
Well, no, you didn't ask me if I was in a crib or in a bassinet or whatever. I mean, I was just 2 years old, so I mean, I was there. But
well, there you go. You're younger than me. That's nice.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I think Neil and I are getting close to that age of retirement. But speaking of which, Elliotte, one of your colleagues, one of your peers, announced at the end of free agent frenzy on July 1st that he was calling it a career, a giant in the industry, both on the print and the broadcast side, Bob McKenzie.
Yep. Well, I mean, the thing I give the most credit to Bob is that, like, there were other insiders in other sports, like Peter Gammons was a big-time insider in baseball, Chris Mortensen in football, but he was the first one that was really committed to he was the first one who was really committed to it in hockey. And like when TSN hired him, it was kind of like the trial run. Like if it doesn't work, then, you know, it doesn't work for anybody. Like there isn't a few of us now. And so I think that's the thing that Bob deserves the most credit for, and I'm the most thankful for, is that he made it work in hockey so that other people could follow in those footsteps. So, I mean, he worked hard. And the thing I really liked about Bob too is he was competitive. He hated to lose. And I really like that about him. Like, I'm friendly with a lot of the people I compete with, but they hate to lose to me and I hate to lose to them. Like, even like on a waiver signing, if somebody beats you to it, like you get mad. And I like that. Like the thing is, like, I think that's like, I believe in trying to treat people right and not always successful in that, but you try to always do it. But when you're competing on your field of play or whatever business you work in, you've got to put that nice guy away a little bit and just be competitive. And Bob was good at that. And I kind of like that. I try to emulate that in the sense that I try to treat people right, but I try to win at what I do.
Well, Elliotte, you win 90% of the time. I'm deeming you the Florida Panthers of insiders.
But you know what? Like, the thing is that's very kind of you, Neil. I really do appreciate that. But like, I look at it this way: some days you eat the bear, and some days the bear eats you. So if you ever get too satisfied, or you ever think, "Oh, I'm doing great," that's when you get eaten. So I try not to rest on that too much.
Well, someday I want to have you back on here and to explain to me and also to all the listeners, because they don't have a clue, how exactly you do an insider's job. Because even for me, it's hard for me to call other GMs. I don't ever ask any questions about anything private, and I'm not even sure that they're going to pick up for me all the time. Whereas you obviously have a network where you've been fair, you've been honest, and people respond to you in giving you information that you need, not too much, but they don't shut you down. And so that's a skill in and of itself.
Well, I think the thing is this. So first, the thing is this, Neil, and this is the most important thing. Again, I try to treat people right. I'm not always successful at it, but I always try to treat people the way I would like to be treated. Like, it doesn't always work. I try to give people a heads up when I'm working on things. It doesn't always work. But I try. And that's the thing. Like, as you know, Neil, because you've been in this chair, not everybody in the league likes what I do. And, you know, that you battle because of that. And I understand it. I always try to respect other people's opinions and points of view. But like, the thing is, at the end of the day, life is about relationships. Do you try to treat people properly? And that's what I try. And I think if you do that, more often than not, things work out for you.
Well, you've been great. And it's an example of you treating people right by you coming on this podcast when you're getting phone calls left and right the 2 days after the July 1st. And you're making time for me and Vic and for NHL Wraparound. And I mean that. I'm being sincere. That shows the character of people. I've tried to do the same thing. I don't turn people down for podcasts and everything. I get asked a lot. And you and I have a special relationship going way back, and I know that's why you did this, and I appreciate that you did this. Yep. And we really have learned a lot from you today, and we are going to let you go so that OPP officer doesn't pull you over for talking
well, I want everyone
microphone.
To know, while we were talking, I did the Orlov deal with San Jose and Nick Leddy being claimed on waivers by San Jose, and I made sure to pull over both times, put the car in park, and let people, and nothing. It was no driving with my phone in my hand. Not. And I want everyone to know that.
I hope you didn't unbuckle your seatbelt at any time while sitting in said seat.
The seatbelt stayed on, Neil. The seatbelt stayed on.
That's good. And your running lights, I hope they were on the whole time on that car.
Yeah. You've spoken like someone who knows Ontario very well. Yes, they were always on.
Well, good luck, Elliotte, going forward, and keep in touch. Thanks for doing this. If you need anybody for 33 thoughts, I've got one thought I could add into your show.
Anytime. Feel free to text it.
Thanks, Elliotte.
Thanks, Elliotte.
All right, guys. Neil, Vic, my pleasure, guys. Have a great summer.
You as well. Tremendous discussion with Elliotte Friedman from Sportsnet and the 32 Thoughts podcast. Our website, NHLWraparound.com, and a little bit of news here is that the website is undergoing a facelift, and we should have a new look later in the summer for everybody. And a reminder that our next scheduled podcast will be probably in around 6 weeks when we do our summer cooler series, looking at each of the 4 divisions, but we may drop in a couple of other shows in the meantime. And also want to just give a special shout out once again to Lugaroo for outfitting us with these great looking polos, and our friend Colin Mulvey for taking care of us.
And I also have on Lugaroo shorts, although you can't see them on YouTube and you can't hear them on Spotify or Apple. I do have on Lugaroo shorts. So wardrobes were supplied by Lugaroo.co. That's LOOGAROO.co. No M at the end. .co.
One of the staples of our show from our outset has been to get information and really ask questions in a way that get more than the boilerplate answers. And boy, did we get that with Elliotte Friedman to wrap up our year today.
Sure did. I mean, some great stuff, great insights. He's also on Hockey Night in Canada. We don't mention that very much, but that's a Sportsnet property, I believe. So, no, he's fantastic, and his work is tedious, and he probably is very irritating to some of the managers because you know what, you don't want to give out information when you're a manager. You want to keep it to yourself. And Elliotte has a way of finding it and then asking you if it's true. And of course, if you lie to these guys, it's not a good thing. So, but he's a great guest and great podcast that he has. And anybody out there that's listening to us should try 32 Thoughts.
Love his frankness. And I have to say that on Saturday nights, I never miss that news segment because quite frankly, when you hear some of that material, it generates ideas for us that we have been using on NHL Wraparound. Not that we're taking the stuff verbatim, but it formulates ideas so that we can have deeper discussion on a lot of those topics.
Absolutely. And that's the type of information you get there. So it's good.
We talked about the NHL entry draft, which took place last weekend and was very interesting just in terms of who was picking, who wasn't picking. 8 teams had multiple picks in the first round, with the Islanders, Chicago, Nashville, and Pittsburgh having 3 picks apiece. And then there were 12 teams that had no picks in the first round. And I found this curious. 11 of those 12 teams made the playoffs this past spring. The New York Rangers were the lone exception.
Wow, that's and that just goes to show you how the league how the league works. 12 teams with no first round pick. That's amazing.
And 11 of those made the playoffs. I did that piece of research this morning, and I was like, wow. That was pretty cool.
Really is. That's really insightful. And of course, if you made the playoffs, you might have needed that first round pick to get a piece to make the playoffs. So that's probably the way it flows there.
Exactly. So Matthew Schaefer, as Elliotte had mentioned before, went number 1 to the New York Islanders. It is the 5th time that the Islanders have had a number 1 overall, but Schaefer's a defenseman and the only defenseman that was drafted number 1 overall by the Islanders prior, Dennis Potvin. And Schaefer comes from the Erie Otters, who had a pretty good product come out of that junior team in Connor McDavid.
Yeah, who's obviously also first overall. So I don't know if the Otters have had more first overalls. I don't think so. I don't remember one. No, I don't remember any. And the Erie Otters are not they're not a staple of the OHL. They're fairly recently put into the league. In other words, within the last 20 years.
Yeah. For people that are wondering, a lot of comparisons are made to the potential of players, and Matthew Schaefer has been compared to the playing style of Miro Heiskanen. So that's a pretty lofty standard that he's going to be going for.
Yeah, but your first overall, you're going to be compared to a star in the league. Obviously, you're going to be compared to, and his comparison in the way he plays is Heiskanen, who is obviously hugely important to the Dallas Stars.
Picked second by San Jose, Michael Misa. And again, he had 134 points, 10 more than the runner-up to lead the OHL in scoring. And you look at some of this offensive depth that the Sharks are starting to develop. They had Macklin Celebrini go first last year, and then Will Smith was the 4th overall pick in 2023. And so this is a club that is really starting to build some offensive pop.
Absolutely. No, then, it's slow and long for the fans out there in San Jose, but the formula works unless you screw up in the draft. But you look at the Edmonton Oilers and how long they've been a real good team. And they were always, they picked high. The Toronto Maple Leafs are a real good team because they were able to get high picks in their bad days. The Chicago Blackhawks, when they were winning their 3 cups, had Jonathan Toews and Kane. And that's why they were so good. So it does work. You have high picks, you make the right picks, and you get better slowly. But then when you are better, you're really good.
Speaking of the Blackhawks, they select the number 1 European-rated player in Anton Frendel from Djurgården. He will not play in the NHL this season, but his style has been compared to Alex Barkov and Anton Lundell. So if he develops into half of those players, Blackhawks are going to have a gem.
They sure are, without any doubt about it. The interesting one for me was the next one that we're going to talk about was James Hagens. And it's so Boston Bruin to pick the guy from Boston College. I mean, it really is. I mean, they just love getting home products. Now, James Hagens is from Long Island. He's not a homegrown product, but playing in BC, he feels like it is. It feels like it is. And I wasn't surprised at all when a BC player, in this case, went to the Boston Bruins. And there was some thought of him maybe going to the Islanders because he had grown up an Islander fan. Yeah. But that wasn't to be because Matthew Schaefer was the consensus first overall pick, and Islanders had to go there.
Logan Cooley is the player that Hagens is most compared to. Before we move on, I just want to go back to the Islanders for a second, because in addition to Schaefer, in the Dobson deal, they also got the 16th and 17th picks from Montreal. They get Victor Eklund, whose brother plays in the NHL, out of Djurgården, and he's the brother of William Eklund, compared to Jesper Bratt, who had a pretty good career year for the New Jersey Devils. And also on defense, Kishan Aikenson out of Barrie. And he's compared to Jacob Trouba, Dion Phaneuf, and Josh Manson. So the Islanders really came out of this draft setting themselves up well for the future, because this has been a franchise, and you've seen it for years going to UBS Arena, that has been relatively stagnant.
That's a good word for it. I mean, they're going to have a tough season this season, I predict, because they don't have Brock Nelson, who's now in Colorado, who they traded there. We'll see if Matt Barzal comes back with any lingering problem from the broken kneecap. And now you don't have Noah Dobson, who was by far their best power play point man. Defensive liability at times, but a real good point man, got a lot of points. And so I think they're probably, it's going to be a tough for them to make the playoffs this coming season. They don't look like that's what they're trying to do. They look like they're building for the future.
Let's go to some news and notes, and let me know if you've heard this before. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Glenn Gulleton named the Dallas Stars head coach. So now all 32 teams have a bench boss. He had been the Oilers' assistant since 2018, 2019, and really credited with turning that power play around. Of course, having Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl is a good place to start. It's his second stint with Dallas, and interestingly, he was fired by Jim Nill, the GM, soon after taking over as GM in May of 2013, but he gets a second chance.
12 years later, Billy Martin returns to the Yankee dugout. No, Glenn Gulutzan, who I know well, and Glenn Gulutzan used to coach Vegas, but not Vegas Golden Knights, the Las Vegas Wranglers, and did a great job in the ECHL, won championships there. So we'll see how he does with Dallas. I mean, credit to Jim Nill saying, look, I don't care if he's been here before, if he's really, sharpened up his coaching skills and has been this good with the Edmonton Oilers. And he got a lot of credit from not only McDavid, but Draisaitl as well, spoke very highly of him. Of course, you didn't mention Evan Bouchard on the point as well. So you got those three guys on there.
Yeah. And
Nugent Hopkins is not chopped liver that plays on there. And Zach Hyman, who's, by the way, a former 50-something goal scorer. But it doesn't always work with those stars, as you know, because everybody wants the puck and there's only one out there. Yeah. So we'll see how Glenn Gulutzan can do. He follows Peter DeBoer, as we remember, who was fired shortly after their playoff elimination. And he'll end up somewhere too, though. Like wherever the first coach gets fired this season, look for Peter DeBoer.
Alex Pietrangelo, defenseman for the Vegas Golden Knights, expected to miss the entire 2025-26 season with multiple surgeries, probably on his hip, coming up during this offseason. He's 35 years old, has 2 years left at $8.8 million AAV. So this is a big loss for Vegas, and there's even a potential that this could be career-ending and that his body is just too beaten up.
Two-time Stanley Cup winner, captain of the St. Louis Blues, the only Stanley Cup they've ever won. And, of course, on the Vegas Golden Knights for their Stanley Cup has been a really good defenseman in the National Hockey League for a very long time.
And speaking of captains, a longtime captain in the NHL passed away on Tuesday at the age of 93, and that is Alex Delvecchio. Played all 24 NHL seasons with Detroit, 3-time Stanley Cup winner, 456 career goals, 1,281 points in 1,550 regular season games. He's a 3-time Lady Byng winner, only 383 penalty minutes in his entire career. And I saw him once, I think, in an exhibition game in Madison Square Garden in the early 70s. And that was the only time that I saw him play. But he often played in the shadow of Gordie Howe. And considering Gordie's reputation of elbows and on the edge play, Delvecchio was the exact opposite.
He was a statesman. I mean, if you really think about Alex Delvecchio, he was the Jean Beliveau of the Detroit Red Wings. And Jean Beliveau, of course, the great captain for the Montreal Canadiens, many Stanley Cups. I watched Alex Delvecchio play many times. And he was a really good player that, as you said, like won the Lady Byng 3 times because he was a great player that didn't need to resort to other stuff. And he is his name goes down as one of the great names. Of course, Delvecchio is a great hockey name. But if you combine how many years Alex Delvecchio was captain with how many years Steve Yzerman was captain, there wasn't much time for anybody else to be captain of that team in between those eras. And that's 2 way different eras for those 2 great Detroit Red Wings.
Clearly, Yzerman, Delvecchio, 2 of the all-time greats in Hockeytown. This is the human side of the story, and over the past 18 months or so, a lot of our human sides have been personal stories from either Neil or myself. And we've talked about a lot of our guests and just players and personalities that kind of fit into the human side. But today's section of our show is going to talk about our viewers and our listeners that have helped us so much during the course of this season.
It is. And by the way, did you have a wardrobe malfunction? Because that wasn't what you were wearing when Elliotte was on our show.
No. As a matter of fact, the last show that we did last year, I had the blue one on. And so have you ever seen anybody look worse in coral or salmon or whatever this color is?
Are those Tommy Bahamas shirts? I mean, they certainly look like it.
It says Sun Surfer on here, so that's another free plug for somebody.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing. There's no way Lugaroo is making that thing.
They're not. But as we go forward here, I want to make sure that we are now addressing our listeners. And look, because I'm wearing this, it just shows how comfortable I am with the people that we speak to on a regular basis.
And just for those of you who aren't watching YouTube, Vic is wearing some god-awful Hawaiian shirt with palm trees, and it from my vantage point, it looks pink. He says it's salmon, but it's one of those shirts that your grandfather wears when he goes on vacation.
And perhaps I'm closing in on becoming a grandfather. So there you go.
Oh, well, I hope not, because neither one of your boys are married.
Hasn't stopped other people. So I want to talk about 3 emails that we have received over the last little while. And one of them came from a gentleman named Antonio. He's originally from northern New Jersey, and I believe he is in Florida now. At least that's what the phone number that was at the end of his email. But a gentleman that listens and I think kind of looks up to you as a former Ranger GM.
Yeah, and a really nice email from him, talking about listening to the show and wanting to get in touch, which we will be doing to give him some help, perhaps if we can, with his career and any questions he has.
Second email came from a Kings fan from northern Idaho. And this gentleman's name is Tom, and he is a forklift driver who happened to come upon our podcast about 3 or 4 months ago. And this is a fellow that had never played goal before and wanted to give it a try and started playing goal over a decade ago for his beer league team, which was the worst in the league at the time. They're called the Slapsticks. And they went from worst in his 12-team league to losing in a shootout in the championship game. So under Tom's backstopping of his club, they've almost gone from worst to first. But just a great story. And I love that it's just somebody out in Idaho that has found us and considers us an important part of getting him through his day.
And through his forklift driving, and listens to it when he's doing that. And that's really fun. And we hope that we can get many, many more emails. But one of my favorite ones was Marco from Milan, Italy. Yes, that's the same Milan where the Olympics are going to be, that the NHL will be participating in. And
we said that we were going to bookend this show with Milan, and we certainly am. And Marco had written to us earlier and sent us a follow-up earlier this week. And he's got a friend named Angelito who is in South Florida, and his wife Sheila and sister Debbie, who are second-generation Italians with parents from Sardinia, they opened a high-end restaurant in Weston, Florida, about 15 minutes away from Sunrise, and it's called Zona Blue. And soon after the Panthers won their second consecutive Stanley Cup, they got a visit from general manager Bill Zito, who came in for a family dinner. This is one of his favorite places to go. And he brought his friend Stanley along to help the patrons celebrate the Stanley Cup. And for those of you watching, we have photos from that event coming in. And this, to me, is one of the great pieces of this, where a gentleman in Milan has a friend in South Florida, and the Stanley Cup is won there, and there's that connection. And we want to thank our listeners in Italy, because after the United States, that is one of the biggest fan bases that we have.
Yeah, it's amazing. I guess we have a thing for Italy, and that's great that this turned out this way. That we were lucky enough to have a listener who has friends in South Florida where Bill Zito went. I mean, I consider us lucky, the lucky podcast that got that letter. But folks, I mean, if you're listening, if you're watching, send us an email. We love it. And we're going to have a whole little piece next season on, what our listeners are saying and a shout outs to listeners. So please do that. We read them all. So it's really great.
And we answer also.
We do.
But once we're done with this show, how about if I change out of this shirt, hop in the car, I'll drive from West Hartford to Greenville, pick you up, and then we could go to Zona Blue in Weston, Florida for dinner.
Are you going to pay?
I knew that was coming.
Well, yeah, because that's how I'm going to decide whether or not I'm going.
Yeah, well, I'm picking you up. I'm investing in the gas and the effort and the driving. So,
well, I can't afford that high-end restaurant.
Maybe we're going to have our buddy Marco pull some strings for us.
Yeah, well, that'd be good. I'd like to get a free meal once in a while.
That'll wrap up our show. Thanks to Elliotte Friedman from Sportsnet and the 32 Thoughts podcast for giving us such great insight today. Thank you to Lugaru for outfitting us with these great looking polos. And thanks to UBS Financial Services, Inc. NHL Wraparound and UBS Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated. UBS is a sponsor of 3 things you need to pay attention to. No other affiliation, relationship, or endorsement is made, suggested, intended, or should be implied or inferred between UBS and VNS Productions, LLC, or any of the individuals or businesses and or their respective products and services appearing in this program.
And again, we want to say thank you to the listeners for the whole season that have been joining us, whether you're just on for this one, is this your first one, or this is your 100th one. We want to thank you for listening. If you can, the more subscriptions we get, the more people that push that button subscribe, the better it is for us. And the longer we can keep going, although we don't intend on stopping. But we encourage you to send us emails, either Neil at NHLWraparound.com or Vic at NHLWraparound.com, or both of us. It doesn't really matter. We just want emails. We just want to hear who's listening. We want to read what your thoughts are, read what your comments are. Do you like the show format? Do you like the content? What would you like to hear about in the future? We are on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify. Of course, you can watch us on YouTube. But the main thing is, once our website is back up and running, go to our website for our whole catalog of shows. That's obviously NHLWraparound.com. So please, as I said, subscribe or like us or give us a check mark or something. And then on Twitter, which is now called X, we are on there as at NHL Wraparound, and you can see shorter clips on there of some of our shows. If you've got a very small attention span, just go on there. Our off-season schedule, We're looking to drop a couple of shows during the summer leading up to our very successful last summer coolers. They'll be dropped around the third week in August to get you prepared for what's coming in the 25-26 season.
I could not have put a wrap on that any better.
Well, that's why it's called Wraparound.
And with that, we wish everybody a great summer, and we will speak to you again in 6 weeks with the summer coolers, as Neil had mentioned, and maybe we'll have a couple of surprise guests before we get to that point. So take care, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.